The state broadcaster CBC is having a total meltdown about being appropriately labeled as state-funded media. If you missed it, well, frankly, that's okay, because ratings indicate that it's basically a statistical rounding error of Canadians who consume CBC content on the regular, especially CBC's flagship news content. No one watches the CBC. I think maybe it's just grandparents who don't know how to change the channel after falling asleep watching curling. The best thing that grandkids can do for their grandparents these days is teach them how to use the remote control so that they can see and experience the world outside of the CBC. Please, little kids, this is the Lord's work. Listen to Auntie Sheila. But back to the meltdown, which I think Ezra did a great job covering on Monday's show. And I'm not just saying that because he's my boss, although it kind of helps. CBC went on a long Twitter diatribe about how they should not be considered government-funded media because although they are quite literally government-funded media to the tune of about $1.2, $1.3 plus billion each year, the CBC claims they should be let off on a technicality on this rule because Twitter's policy indicates that government-funded media may have varying degrees of government involvement over editorial content. Not that it does, but it may, and I think that's accurate for the CBC. But really, why the resistance to transparency, CBC? You do take government money, and a lot of it, and people should know that about you. That government-funded, state-funded label should be slapped all over CBC content as though it were a cigarette warning label. Careful before you consume. Now, in response, the crybullies at CBC have decided that they are going to stop publishing content on Twitter. They use a turn of phrase my mom was famous for using. Quit threatening me with a good time. Now, apparently benevolent libertarian billionaire new owner of Twitter, Elon Musk, continues to make Twitter a better place every single day, doesn't he? Now, another tantrum thrown by the CBC stems from Elon Musk conceding that, okay, fine, CBC does get advertising dollars, so instead of just a plain government-funded label, they're going to get a label of being 69% government funded. It's a beautiful and epic troll of the sad sack subsidy gobblers at the state broadcaster. It's really quite something to see. Elon Musk is doing more to push the well-kept whiners at the CBC around and put them back in their place than the conservative opposition has ever done in this country, even when the conservative opposition was in government. It's gorgeous to see, and it's good to remind the CBC that while they're treated like some sort of national treasure by the establishment class here in Canada, they're just some sickly little minnow swimming in somebody else's very big pond. And in the grand scheme of things outside of Canada, they're quite inconsequential. And it stings. It stings these people to hear it about themselves. It's like a crucifix to a vampire to remind CBC just how nobody outside of Canada cares about them. And the only reason we care about them in Canada is that we're forced to care about them because they keep taking all of our money. Anyway, all of this whining and crying and gnashing of the teeth from the CBC inspired me to take a poke around at some of the other ways that these people receive funding outside of the 1.3-ish billion in annual taxpayer subsidies and that roughly 30 or 31% of their budget that they get in ad revenue that they scoop from private sector broadcasters. Did you know that these absolute panhandlers at the CBC also take advantage of the Canadian Media Fund? Did you even know there was a Canadian Media Fund? It's just another subsidy vehicle for failing media companies. It's normally not meant for the likes of the CBC, but that, of course, has not stopped the CBC from putting their grubby hands into that pot, too. And in this instance, the CBC reached into the Canadian Media Fund to create content to brainwash your kids. Have you been to CBC Kids lately? Of course you're not, because nobody has. Nobody. No. But if you haven't been there, let me explain it to you. It's a cluttered feed of climate change nonsense, why Donald Trump is mean, why people should be allowed to just stroll across the border at Roxham Road, why hockey players should wear pride jerseys, why pipelines are bad, and why you should confuse yourself with pronouns. And it's all wrapped in kid-friendly colors. It's targeted at other people's kids, using other people's money to brainwash other people's kids into the political ideology of the Liberals. But the money CBC already receives to brainwash adults has not been quite adequate enough to brainwash the kids. Now they need more. This is why just last year, outside of all the subsidies that the CBC already receives and the ad dollars that they already get, CBC received nearly $1 million from the Canadian Media Fund specifically for CBC Kids in 2 separate grants. One for $250,000 for what looks like video production, and a second grant for $700,000 to, I guess, maintain that very cluttered, kid-friendly social justice website. Do you ever wonder how many hits that website gets after school hours? You know, after social justice brainwashing teachers are no longer on the clock, directing youngsters to go to that page as some sort of credible resource? How many kids are actually visiting that site on their own out of curiosity? Or even better, how many parents are directing their kids to visit that site on their own? Probably as many people watch the 6 o'clock news on the CBC, as in almost none.
That was an excerpt from the Ezra Levant Show. I'm Ezra Levant. Every weekday, I do a monologue about the topic of the day. Then I interview a fascinating guest either in studio or via Skype. And then I read your mail, whether it's fan mail or hate mail, which is sometimes even more interesting. This is on our premium service, though, called Rebel News Plus. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. It's $8 a month or less if you buy a whole year in advance. You get my show every weeknight, plus Sheila Gunn Reid show every week. It's called The Gunn Show. It's pretty amazing. You know, we rely on you because we do not take a dime from the government. In Canada, that makes us almost unique. So please help us out and help yourself to some great journalism at rebelnewsplus.com.